Chapter 11, Bear Viewing. It was Saturday, and the end of the first week of camp had arrived. Several of us counselors had a night off while the others kept an eye on our cabins. We did not want to drive all the way to the nearest town, so we would have to find something to do in camp. One of the novelties for the kitchen and program staff when they got bored was the grease pit. About 50 yards behind the camp sat a hole that was about 3 feet deep by 5 feet across. That hole, nicknamed the grease pit, was nothing more than a repository for all the discarded cooking grease from the previous week. Most camps are on their own septic systems, not public sewers, and grease dumped into a septic tank is not a good thing. After cooking 3 meals a day for over 300 people, all that spent cooking grease can be monumental. Since the grease has to be put somewhere, the cheapest and easiest way for most camps to deal with the grease was to bury it. Burying the grease presents its own problems, that being digging lots and lots of holes and covering them as needed. About 10 years ago, the then camp cook had a brilliant idea. Why not dig one large hole for all the summer's grease, and at the end of each week, place that week's grease in the hole? Well, the camp cook did just that and dug a big hole behind the kitchen. After he dumped the first week's grease into the pit, a strange thing happened. The next week, when he came to add more grease, he noticed the previous week's grease was all gone. He then dumped that week's grease into the pit. And being a curious fellow, he stayed up all night and observed the pit. He soon discovered large numbers of bears coming to the pit at night and devouring the grease. He rationalized, why not dump the grease into the pit at the end of each week and let the bears clean it up? After several weeks, he saw the bears were consistent and came at the end of each week for their greasy meal. In time, he began to invite the camp staff every Saturday night to view the bears consuming the grease. And that is how the tradition of bear viewing night started at Clovis. The present custom at camp was to gather each day's spent grease into large 2-gallon tin cans and place them in the kitchen refrigerator. There they would sit until Saturday night when they were dumped into the pit. Hollywood invited Ziggy, Wild Bill, Tex, and me to view the event our first Friday at camp. It was our night off from cabin duty, and we graciously accepted the invitation, since nothing better was going on. Also attending that night's event was our lifeguard, Charles. At about 11 o'clock on that moonlit Saturday night, head cook Raj, the 2 dishwashers, Chris and Sanjay, along with Raj's assistant cook, Vladimir Luchinskaya, a.k.a. Thing Dog, all marched out to the bear pit. In their hands, they each carried one full 2-gallon can of spent cooking grease. Upon arriving at the pit, they took their large kitchen spoons and unceremoniously scraped all that grease out of the cans and into the pit. The 4 returned to the kitchen patio and took their seats next to the other spectators. We all sat in lawn chairs facing the bear pit, waiting for the show to start. The kitchen patio was close enough to the bear pit to get a good view, but far enough away to take cover in the kitchen if the need should arise. There were even 2 sets of binoculars available for anyone wishing to get a very close-up view of the soon-to-arrive dinner guests. For the camp staff, the bear viewing event was a chance to unwind, sit, and chat with other staff members as we waited for our guests to arrive. For the bears, this had to be a much more festive event, a true culinary experience, an event which had taken place almost every Saturday night during the summer for the last 10 years. It was no formal affair, for no invitation, no black ties or tuxes were necessary. In fact, the only required dress for the dinner guests was a smelly old black fur coat. But nonetheless, it was a must-attend event for any socially conscious bear. The scent of all the different foods fried in that grease drifting through the crisp mountain air was enough to let all the bears know the event was happening as scheduled. So there we gathered, the curious, the bored, and the neophytes. And as we sat and waited, we began to quietly chat. Tex began to speak. Heard a story from an old Serrano Indian once. Said that underneath the bar's fur their skeletal muscles looked very human. Also heard the local natives never killed a bear because they believed their great shaman reincarnated as bears. Ziggy soon chimed in. I always thought of bears as forest creatures, having a similarity to a lion in the savannah or a gorilla in the jungle. Wild Bill gave Ziggy a confused look. Ziggy went into more detail. Well, the lion is king of the savannah, and the gorilla is king of the rainforest. And well, these bears are kind of king of the North American forest. And their only predator is man. They're always kind of indifferent to everything, like it doesn't bother them. Wild Bill nodded. Man, I've always thought of them more like dogs of the forest. That caused everyone to give Wild Bill a curious look. Wild Bill went on. When I was by myself in the Sierra wilderness for those many months, I had a black bear that kept coming into my camp. Eventually, I became his good bud. We used to play fetch quite a bit. I'd throw a stick and he would go chase it. You what? Asked Raj. Now, more than one of us was beginning to get a little uncomfortable with what we considered Wild Bill's tall tale. Lifeguard Charles stuck his leg out from his chair towards Wild Bill. Here, if you want to pull my leg, take hold, but if you pull any harder, you're going to pull it right off. We all laughed. Wild Bill continued. No, man, I'm serious. I had to use a stick to stir my dehydrated food, and after I finished, I'd toss it in the woods. And dig this, my bear friend always went after it. Well, that explains why he went after it. It had food on it, replied Tex. Wild Bill pondered Tex's comment for a bit and said, I never thought of it that way. Always wondered why he never dropped the stick for me to throw it again. He usually just chewed it up in a million pieces. You're a strange fellow, Wild Bill. A very strange fellow, was all Tex could say in response. Hollywood began to speak. Well, I don't know about fetch, but actually some anthropologists believe the bear and the dog were on the same evolutionary chain some 500 million years ago, and at some point in time diverged. Look at the bear's snout. It actually has a resemblance to the dog's snout. Ziggy leaned over to Raj and inquired, Are you sure they're going to show up? We've been here almost 20 minutes and still no bears have showed up at the pit. You must be patient, replied Raj. Tex interjected, my grandpa told me these bears up here are all black bears brought in by the Forest Service from the Sierras. In the 1860s, hundreds of grizzly bears inhabited this place. What happened to them? Asked Raj. Well, grizzlies are very unpredictable and don't get along well with humans. When thousands of settlers came up during the gold rush in the 1860s, clashes between the grizzlies and the humans with guns were inevitable, and by the early 1900s, there wasn't a single grizzly left in California. Dude, that's so correct, commented Wild Bill. That's why the only one place you can find a grizz in California is on the state flag. Thing Dog had been scanning the area surrounding the pit through the binoculars, and not another second had passed before he whispered, Quiet, you guys. Behind the big pine to the right of the pit, something is moving. We all focused our gaze to the stand of pines by the pit, and sure enough, in the bright moonlight, we could see a very large, dark figure moving towards the pit with caution. It is Uma. I have not seen her since last summer, said Raj. Uma was a large female black bear, weighing in at approximately 300 pounds. She was the first guest to arrive, but no stranger to Camp Clovis dinner parties. In fact, Uma was getting on in age, and Raj believed after talking with the former cook of Clovis that Uma had been present at the very first dinner party 10 years earlier. As Uma came into full view, we realized how big the black bears actually were. Ziggy asked, If they're all black bears up here, why is this bear brown? Black bears can be either brown or black, replied Hollywood. God, they're big, was my only comment. The female black bears are usually smaller than the males. I guess you never saw a bear up close. Male black bears in these mountains usually average 500 pounds. I read somewhere that the largest black bear on record was from New Brunswick and weighed almost 1,000 pounds. Shh, scolded Raj. You will scare her off. We all sat in silence as Uma walked around the pit a time or two. After deciding everything was kosher, she took her place at the dinner table and commenced to plunge her huge paw into the pit and scooped out a large helping of the main course. Lapping it up with delight, she smeared pawful after pawful across her face and into her mouth. It appeared to meet with her approval. Uh-oh, here comes another guest, whispered Thing Dog. "It is Gus," said Raj. Gus, an older male black bear and a frequent guest, was about 100 pounds larger than Uma. Gus approached the pit cautiously, stood up on his hind legs, sniffed the night air, and grunted a few times, trying to get Uma to notice. But she paid no heed. She ignored Gus and continued her feasting. It seemed Gus approved of the dinner fare, for he soon thrust himself down on all fours and into the grease pit. If Uma's table manners appeared a little unrefined, Gus was just plain crass as he lunged headfirst into the grease pit and smeared both paws against his mouth. Within 30 minutes, another 2 bears had arrived, Clyde and Betsy. Betsy, whom Raj had not seen the 2 previous summers, was a pleasant surprise. A minute after she arrived from behind the pines, we saw a small cub emerge. "So that is where Betsy has been," murmured Raj. We watched as the cub, without any luck, tried to get a seat at the dinner table. This highbrow dinner party was for adults only, and Betsy didn't seem to mind as the other bears kept pushing the cub out of the way. "Let us call him Cubby," said Raj. Cubby would have to wait until the adults were finished and see what leftovers he could salvage. We watched and laughed as Cubby kept trying to find a spot at the dinner table, but to no avail. Eventually, he wandered off unnoticed by Betsy, who was now in some sort of euphoric trance as she lapped up the grease. There wasn't much conversation at that dinner table, only an occasional grunt or two. "Uh-oh, I think trouble's coming," warned Thing Dog. Raj grabbed the other set of binoculars and fixed his gaze behind the pit. We all looked out toward the pines, and out emerged a huge black bear that appeared to be almost 100 pounds bigger than Gus. "It is Omar," bleated Raj. "You don't mean Omar the Terrible?" asked Hollywood. Yes, gulped Raj. We watched as Omar walked to the pit and in one backhand knocked Gus flying into the dirt. Omar seemed to have no problem making space at the dinner table. Ziggy picked up the binoculars Raj had laid down and examined the huge bear in close detail. What's wrong with his nose?" Ziggy asked. "He has no nose," replied Thing Dog. No nose?" "No nose." "Why?" "It was cut off." Raj went into the kitchen and within a moment came out with a number 10 can in his hand. He held it up above his head for all to see. The can was not dented, and yet it had 5 razor-sharp holes in it, which sparked our curiosity. "How did all those holes get in there without bending the can?" asked Ziggy. "I did not put the holes in the can. Omar's claws did," replied Raj. "Wow," exclaimed Ziggy. We were all impressed. "Man, those are some sharp claws, dude," Wild Bill commented. Chris had been observing our dinner guests, unmoved by the clawed can. No doubt he had already seen that can quite a few times in the past. "About 5 summers ago, before I was head cook," Raj gazed out into the bear pit as he spoke, and then suddenly went quiet. "I do not want to think about this. Thing Dog, you tell the story." Yes. 5 years ago, Omar, he managed to get into the kitchen one night. Head cook at that time, Leon Stefanski, he very startled when Omar began to rip doors off walk-in. Leon, he take rolling pin and bang the table to scare Omar, but that only make Omar more angry. Omar give a huge growl and head for Leon. Leon grabbed lid off metal trash can to protect himself from Omar's sharp claws. Then he reached for huge butcher knife. Afraid for his life, like madman, he began to swing in every direction. Somehow, Leon's butcher knife come close enough to Omar's nose to slice off part of it. That caused much blood to flow. Omar, he let out loud, gruesome moan. Terrible growl, so loud and awful it probably heard back in Mother Russia. A sound not of this earth, not of animal or human. Director of neighboring camp, a mile away, report that even from his camp he can hear monsters growl. He described it as sound so terrible it feel like his flesh burn and jump from his spine.